When people ask where I am from, I say Mapleton, Ohio, because it is easier than pointing to a spot between two river towns and telling a long story about cornfields, freight trains, and a sky that could open like a throat. Mapleton is the kind of place where summers smell like hot tar and cut grass, where the parade on the 4th loops around the square twice because the route would be too short otherwise. We had a brick house with faded green shutters and a front porch that always leaned a little to the left, the way a tired man leans when he thinks nobody is watching. That leaning porch is the stage where my life began, if you are the kind of person who thinks life is a play with props and cues and an audience. I do not always think that, but sometimes I do. I am the younger daughter. My sister's name is Madison, but in my mother's mouth it was always something softer, like honey on the tongue. Maddie. I am Emma. In my mother's mouth, my name sounded like a caution, Ma, that tiny hinge in the middle catching like a door that has swelled in the summer heat. If you had stepped into our kitchen when I was little, you would have smelled coffee that had burned on the warmer too long, and cinnamon and Tide detergent, because my mother folded laundry at the table. The calendar on the wall was always crowded with notes in my mother's square handwriting. Dental cleanings, booster shots, work schedules for her at the hospital billing office, oil changes for my father's truck. On Madison's birthday, the box would be fat with hearts and exclamation marks. On mine, it would be tidy. A single star. Once my father drew a smiley face, and my mother erased it and wrote the time of Madison's volleyball banquet over it. If you have never watched someone erase your smiley face, you might not understand how a small thing can feel like a tectonic one. When I was 6 and Madison was 7, we learned to ride bikes in the same afternoon. My father held the back of Madison's seat and ran down the street in work boots that clapped the asphalt like applause. She wobbled once, twice, then found herself and flew, a pink streak with ribboned handlebars. I was waiting on the curb with my blue bike and a helmet that pinched at my chin. "1 second, Em," my mother called, the way you call to a cashier when you have to run back for eggs. "1 second and we'll get you going." Madison looped the block like a comet. When she came around, my father whooped and clapped and said, "That's my girl. You see that, Linz?" My mother laughed and said she did. I sat with my toes digging little half-moons into the curb and tried to keep my face still. "1 second," my mother said again. "Maddie, show Daddy that trick turn you do." Dusk had fallen by the time anybody remembered I existed. The porch light came on. The mosquitoes found my ankles like they had been taking attendance. My father finally jogged back to me, breathless and giddy, and set his big hand between my shoulder blades. "All right," he said. "Little one, let's roll." We made it 8 houses down before he let go, and when he did, I rode straight into Mr. Pruitt's hedge because you cannot steer in the dark if you have never been taught where the street goes. My mother's laugh floated to me, a shape I would learn to dread, and my father said I should have watched how my sister did it. He said, "You always make things harder than they have to be, Em." By the time I was 9, I had become an expert at reading the room. I could look at the way my mother's jaw tightened, at the angle of my father's hat on the hall shelf, at the mess of shoes by the back door, and I knew what kind of night we were in for. A good night meant my father grilled, and my mother poured a second glass of Chardonnay, and nobody mentioned the electric bill. A bad night meant a lot of quiet, and then too much noise. On bad nights, Madison would come to the table rolling stories off her tongue. How she had almost made student council, how Coach thought she had a powerful serve for a girl her age, and my parents would light up like somebody had plugged them in. If I spoke, my words would slide off the table and onto the floor, and you know how it is with words on the floor. Somebody will sweep them up and dump them without ever really looking. There was a birthday. Let me set the scene, because it is the kind of scene that explains other scenes. I was turning 9. My mother baked a cake, and the whole house smelled like it had put on a sweater made of sugar. When she pulled the cake from the oven, she frowned. "Shoot," she said. "It's red velvet like Maddie's." She said it like she was surprised, though it was the 3rd year in a row. "You like red velvet too, don't you, Em?" She had already started mixing the cream cheese frosting, which is how you knew the question was a formality. "I do not like red velvet. It tastes like a secret trying to pass as chocolate. But I nodded, because if you have been a certain kind of girl, you know that nodding can stop storms. At the party, my mother sliced generous squares for everybody and handed me a thin corner piece where the frosting was sparse. Madison took 2, laughing, saying she was carb loading before her practice. When the candles came, there were fewer than you would expect, an even number my mother had scavenged from a drawer. Madison leaned toward me, close enough that I could see the little gold flecks in her eyes. "Make a big wish," she said like a dare. I wished to be seen. I blew. The smoke curled into the kitchen light and disappeared. In school I did fine. Better than fine, actually. I was the kid who left little pencil dents on standardized tests from pressing too hard. Teachers wrote notes home about my reading. Mrs. Caldwell let me sit on the rug and read aloud when the class was rowdy, because my voice was steady like a metronome, and the story would settle everyone like snow. Madison's teachers wrote notes home too, but they sounded different. Madison is a leader. Madison's energy is contagious. Madison needs room to shine. When she got a B, there were balloons. When I got an A, there was a nod from my father over the paper. "That's what you're supposed to do, right?" he said. I learned to keep my good news in my pockets like smooth river stones. I learned to take them out and turn them over when I was alone. You might be thinking I am bitter. I am not. Or not only. I am a careful historian of small things. There is a difference. In middle school, the town grew smaller the way a shirt does when you accidentally run it through the dryer too many times. You could not move without brushing up against somebody's story. Madison's stories were big and bright and took up space. Mine had edges I did not show. Girls found me, the ones who moved through the halls like they were mapping a future and wanted somebody who listened without interrupting. At lunch, we traded granola bars and practiced winged eyeliner in each other's phone cameras. If you looked at us, we were just girls with chipped nail polish and secrets. If you listened to us, you would hear the way we were keeping one another alive. Madison watched. She always watched. I could feel her gaze on me from across the cafeteria, a little flare at the base of my neck. She did not like that I had something she did not, even if that something was as simple as a table to sit at where I laughed with my mouth open. One day, she came over and set her tray down and told a loud story about how Coach said she might be a captain one day. And my friends smiled politely the way girls are trained to smile at someone circling the table. And then Madison looked at me and said, "You should be careful who you hang out with, Em. Mama says Kayla's parents let boys come over when they're not home." Kayla's cheeks went pink and then red. I felt something break in my chest, not like a bone, more like a wishbone. "That's not true," I said, my voice low, but Madison was already moving away, satisfied, as if she had set something on fire and stood back to watch. At home, that afternoon, my mother said without looking up from a stack of pharmacy receipts, "Your sister says you're running with a fast crowd." She said it like a weather report. My father folded the paper loud enough to be a commentary. "You don't have to be like your sister," he added, which was funny, because the truth was I could not be like my sister, even if I had wanted to. There are some doors you can only open if somebody else hands you the key. I tried not to bring friends home after that. The house had an odd way of shrinking around girls I liked. My mother would get her gentle judge voice. My father would ask questions that were actually statements. Madison would go quiet in a way that felt predatory, and then later, when the door closed, accuse my friend of taking something small, a lipstick, a bracelet from a state fair booth, a $10 bill from a kitchen jar, and my parents would believe her on principle. My mother would say, "I hate to think it, but something is missing and Madison noticed it first." And then she would sigh, and I would watch my friend shrink a little in front of me and leave, hugging herself. And I would think, I cannot bring people here to be hurt. I cannot bring them here to learn what I already know. So we lived in parks and coffee shops and cars with the windows down. We learned the shapes of ourselves in other people's spaces. That is a kind of education, too. High school split the town open the way September splits a watermelon, all bright red and seeds and wet sweetness. Suddenly there were pep rallies and college banners and whispers about scholarships. Madison got a boyfriend with a leather jacket who smelled like cologne and motor oil. My father loved him. He slapped the kids back at dinner as if he could clap him into the family by force. "That's a solid handshake," my father would say, like it was a blood type. My mother beamed. I tried to be polite. I was polite. I also noticed the way Madison's eyes followed me when the boy laughed at my jokes. The first boy who ever asked me out did it next to the vending machines after algebra. He was sweet in a gawky way and had a habit of running one hand down the back of his neck when he was nervous, which was often. He said, "I think you're—" and then he stopped, because sometimes thinking you are brave and being brave are two different sports. He started again. "I like the way you read out loud in English," he said in a rush, like somebody tipping a bucket. I said yes, because nobody had ever said they liked my voice like that. And then I stood there in the buzzing fluorescent light and felt something open and something else curl up to protect the opening. I did not want to bring him home. Of course, my mother insisted. She said, "If you're going to be serious about someone, we need to know him," as if knowing were a benediction. On the day he came for spaghetti and salad and garlic bread, Madison appeared at the top of the stairs in a dress that had not been in her closet that morning. She leaned on the banister as if it were a prop in a play where she was the lead. During dinner, she asked my boyfriend what music he liked and laughed with him about a band I had never heard of. When I got up to help my mother with the dishes, Madison followed me into the kitchen and whispered, "He's cute. Does he know you're you?" She did not make a face. She did not have to. I felt myself go very still. Later, on the porch, my boyfriend touched my elbow. He said, "Your sister told me a lot of stuff about you that did not feel like her business to tell." His eyes were kind and a little baffled. "She said you get jealous easily, that you like to snoop." He swallowed. It just felt off. I loved him a tiny bit for saying that. Not the forever kind. The kind you keep in a drawer like a pressed flower. My parents believed Madison, of course. My mother pushed her glasses down her nose and peered at me like she was trying to bring me into focus. "I just want to help you make good choices," she said, which is the sort of sentence that sounds like love until you learn to hear the rest of it, the part that says, "You do not make them on your own." My father folded his arms and told me that boys sense chaos in a girl. "They take advantage," he said, "or run." The relationship collapsed under all that watching. It is hard to learn someone's mouth when your sister appears everywhere like a commercial. When it ended, Madison stood in my doorway with a face full of sympathy that was the meanest thing I had seen. "Oh, Em," she said like a lullaby, "you'll find someone your speed." I did not ask what speed she thought that was. I shut the door. Here is the thing about being the lesser daughter in a small house. You learn to store your power in odd places. I put mine in books because nobody polices a girl reading. It looks like obedience. I put it in late-night study sessions when the house went quiet, except for the soft-sized lies of a television somewhere. I put it in a future I could not quite picture, but could feel like a change in weather. At the kitchen table, I spread brochures for colleges and technical programs and scholarships I had printed at the library. I timed my research for when Madison was out and my mother was at her third shift of size. My father would walk through and see all that paper and say, "Don't get ahead of yourself," as if my hope were reckless, as if hope were the kind of thing that could put a family in debt. Madison's college talk was different. It came with tours and new blouses and the kind of perfume that makes a girl smell like a lobby. My mother said words like legacy and connections. My father said, "We'll make it happen for our Maddie." He said it like a pledge. About me, he said, "We'll see." I learned to put the words "we'll see" in the same drawer where I kept the pressed flower and take them out only when I had the strength to look at something fragile. At church on Sundays, there was a way the mothers looked at Madison and then looked at me that made me want to sit in the balcony even though Mapleton First Baptist did not have one. Madison shook hands and collected compliments like bracelets. I stacked chairs and poured coffee and went home with the smell of powdered creamer on my hands. Once, after a youth group car wash, someone slipped a $20 bill into Madison's jar and said, "You're going places." I watched the way Madison's mouth softened, the way my mother's elbow found Madison's waist. I took my jar home half full and counted quietly in my room, whispering the numbers like prayers. You want the moment when it all tipped? There was not a single moment. There was a series of tiny inclines, and then one day I looked up and realized I had been walking uphill for years. But there was a scene that stays with me the way certain flavors do, long after the plate is put away. It is late winter of my junior year. The maple in our front yard has a skim of ice on every branch so that the whole tree looks like it is being honest about its bones. Madison has been home from her first semester at a college I am not supposed to name because, in our house, naming a thing gives it the power to embarrass you. My mother is making a list for the grocery store. My father is flipping channels and calling each new program terrible. I am at the table with forms spread out, scholarship applications, an essay that asks me to write about a challenge and how I overcame it. Here's one, my mother says suddenly, with the briskness of someone trying to sound casual. "We needed to talk to you, Em. Your sister's tuition. It's a lot. We didn't anticipate how much. So for you, we're thinking it might be better to take a gap year, get a job, save. We'll revisit after Maddie's second year. If things are better, maybe then." I know how to breathe in all kinds of weather. I do it now. Inhale, exhale. "A gap year," I say. "Not a punishment," my father adds. "Just practical." "I can apply for loans," I say, because I have done the research, because I have a folder labeled options with a paper clip that could double as a weapon. My mother puts her pen down gently, as if what she is about to say will already hurt enough. "Loans are serious, honey, and you have such a tender heart. We wouldn't want you to make a mistake you'll be paying for the rest of your life." She glances at Madison, as if to make sure the script lands. "We'll help you decide what's worth it when the time comes." Madison, who is wearing one of my sweaters in a way that makes it look like it belongs to her, tips her head and smiles the way a cat smiles. "There are lots of great jobs here in town," she says. "You can save up and figure out what you really want. College isn't for everyone." It is astonishing how quickly a room can fog. I remember the taste of metal. I remember the feeling in my hands, a tremble I hid by stacking papers. I remember choosing silence like I would choose a weapon behind my back. "Thank you for thinking about me," I say, because I am a girl who knows how to perform gratitude when backed into a corner. After, in my room, I lay every paper out on the bedspread and smooth them like a blessing. I write an essay that begins like this. There are people who will tell you the story of their life is a staircase. Mine is a fire escape. I fill the page. I print it. I send it with a stamp and a prayer. I have learned the kind of prayers that work for me are not the kind where you ask God to change other people. They are the kind where you ask for a door that does not slam. Spring slides in, pink and reckless. I keep my head down. I pull honor cords through my days like thread. I work weekends at a bakery that smells like Saturdays even on Wednesdays. The owner, a widow named Ruth with flour in the creases of her hands, tells me stories about the city she lived in when she was young, about the man she loved who could fix anything if you gave him time, about the way she bought this place because she wanted to wake up inside the smell of bread. "People think love is always music," she tells me, arranging croissants. "Sometimes it's just repeating the same good act until it becomes a life." When the email arrives, I am not home. I am at the bakery, and the morning rush has just ended, and the phones are quiet, and Ruth is in the back checking the proofs. I wipe my hands, open my phone, and there it is. A subject line that says, in simple, unadorned words, full scholarship. The world pops like a soap bubble, then forms again around me, but warmer. The letter says phrases I have been afraid to imagine. Tuition covered, fees covered, living stipend, welcome. I sink onto a stool and laugh, then put a hand over my mouth because laughing like that feels like flying. And in my life, flying is something you do when nobody is looking. Ruth finds me and presses her floury palm to my cheek. "Well," she says, eyes bright. "I got it," I whisper. "Ruth, I got it." She does not say she knew I would. She says, "Of course you did. Now what kind of cake are we making to tell them?" I tell my parents by posting the news on social media first. This is not petty. This is protection. In my family, a public announcement is a kind of armor. It is harder to take back a celebration once the town has baked it into the afternoon. The post is simple. I do not gloat. I write, "I am grateful." I write, "I cannot wait to learn." I write, "Thank you to the teachers and bakers and librarians who saw me." The comments bloom, then pile. My mother calls with her breath a little fast. "Em," she says, This is big." She sounds delighted for a total of 5 seconds. And then I hear the shift in her voice, the way she moves from joy to logistics, the way some people move from standing to walking without thinking. "Are you sure it's real? There's a lot of scams." My father's voice comes from somewhere behind her, loud enough to make the phone crackle. "Ask about fine print," he says. "There's always fine print." Madison does not call. That night, when I come home, she is sitting on the couch with a face the color of rain. She watches me cross the room. She says, "You got lucky." I do not say anything. She repeats it, as if she is studying the sentence in a mirror. "You got lucky." There is a part of me that wants to shrug and let the word stand. Luck is a sweet word. It forgives. It looks like a dandelion puff. But I have a sudden memory of every night at the kitchen table, of every way I learned to keep my breath even while someone tried to confuse me about the temperature of the room. "I worked," I say quietly. "And also, yes, there is always a little luck." Madison smiles the way you smile at a dog when you do not like dogs. "Well," she says, standing up, "it is not like you are going to some top school. It's fine." She says fine with all the contempt a girl can pack into one syllable. I should tell you that I left for college that August, and that a new life opened like a new window, and that is true, but that is for later. What matters now is the shape of the house in the days after the scholarship. My mother moves through the rooms like someone who is trying to be careful not to bump the furniture. My father avoids me and then overcompensates, bringing home a gas station cupcake with a single striped candle and setting it on the counter like a peace offering. Madison grows louder, and then quieter, and then loud again. The house itself seems to hold its breath, as if it has learned we are about to meet a different version of ourselves, and is not sure whether to root for us or for its own familiar creaking. Here is the last scene before the next chapter begins. It is a Tuesday night, and the crickets are talking. I am on the porch with a stack of thank you notes, writing in neat loops. My father steps outside and stands beside me, looking out toward the street as if the street has answers. "I'm proud of you," he says without looking at me. The words are strange in his mouth. They catch on the same hinge my name always did. You're doing all right." I look at him, and for a moment he is the man running after a pink bicycle, and for a moment I am the girl riding into a hedge in the dark. "Thank you," I say, and I mean it. From inside the house, Madison laughs at something on her phone, a laugh like a bell that does not want to be a bell anymore. My mother calls her name, and it floats, so light. I tuck another note into an envelope. I press the flap down like a promise. When I finally go to bed, I pull the blinds and look at the maple tree, at its honest bones, and I think about what Ruth said. Sometimes love is repeating the same good act until it becomes a life. For me, the good act is simple. Keep choosing myself in the smallest ways I can, until one day the choosing looks like a door opening. The door will open. But first, there will be a wedding, and a plan, and my sister in a dress that is not hers. But that, as they say, is another part. The first time I walked across the campus at Riverton State, I felt like somebody had turned the contrast up on the whole world. The brick buildings glowed a deeper red than anything back home. The grass on the quad was so green, it looked like it had been painted overnight. Students sprawled on blankets reading, talking, napping, and no one seemed to be watching for the sharp edge of someone else's approval. I carried my scholarship packet under my arm like a life raft and thought, this is what air tastes like. My dorm room was on the 3rd floor of a building older than my grandparents' marriage. The radiator clanged in winter. The windows stuck in summer. My roommate, a girl from Charlotte named Sierra, taped fairy lights above our beds and burned lavender incense that was probably against the rules, but smelled like a second chance. On our first night, she flopped onto her mattress and said, "So, what's your story?" I opened my mouth and then shut it. My story was too long for that moment. Instead, I said, "I like to read out loud." She grinned. "Good. You can keep me awake when I'm writing papers at 3 a.m. Freedom has a sound. For me, it was the sound of my own footsteps in hallways where no one knew my name. It was the click of my student ID unlocking the library at midnight. It was the thump of my heart when I raised my hand in class and a professor said, "Good point, Emma." I learned the city buses. I learned the taste of falafel from the cart near the science building. I learned that the cafeteria food tasted better when eaten under a tree. I called my parents on Sundays at first. My mother would ask if I was eating. My father would ask about grades. Madison would be on speaker sometimes, her voice like a cat purring under the table. "Still no boyfriend?" she would say. "Don't wait too long, Em. College is prime time." I would laugh lightly and say, "We'll see." After a while, I called less. I sent postcards instead. Safe phrases about weather, classes, the squirrels on campus that would come right up to your shoe. The less they knew, the more space I had to breathe. I met Daniel in a coffee shop off campus, the kind of place with mismatched mugs and a wall of books no one actually borrowed. He was sitting at a corner table with a laptop and a face that looked like he had already heard 3 jokes that day and was ready for a 4th. He had a way of looking at you like you were not a puzzle to solve, but a story he wanted to listen to. We started talking about the book I was holding, Toni Morrison's Sula, and somehow did not stop talking for 2 hours. When he stood to leave, he said, "Same time next week?" Like it was the most natural thing in the world. It became a rhythm, coffee, conversation, the slow braid of 2 lives. Daniel was the opposite of Madison's boyfriends. He did not preen, he did not compare. He listened. When he was angry, he went quiet and thought before speaking. When he was happy, he laughed like a door opening. He was studying political science, but also worked nights at a campus security desk, a job he called paid people watching. He said he liked patterns, liked figuring out what people would do next. Sometimes when he watched a movie, he would guess the ending and be right. "I'm not psychic," he told me once, sipping from a chipped mug. "I just pay attention." That was when I realized I had spent my whole life paying attention too, but only for survival. He did it for curiosity. There is a difference. We took our time. We walked everywhere. We cooked pasta in his tiny apartment with the crooked stove. We talked about the families we came from and the ones we wanted to build. When I told him about Madison, carefully, piece by piece, he did not interrupt or give me advice. He just said, "That's a lot," and reached for my hand. One night, after we had been together a year, we sat on the campus steps under a sky full of stars that looked like someone had spilled salt on black velvet. He said, "Do you ever want to go back?" Meaning Mapleton. I said, "Only for the people who were kind to me." He nodded. "You know," he said, "some people talk about what they would do in a situation like yours. I actually do things." He smiled a little. "It's not a threat. It's just who I am." That was the first time I thought, if I ever marry someone, it could be this man. When we got engaged, quietly, just the 2 of us, no fireworks, no balloons, it felt like setting down a heavy bag you had been carrying so long you forgot it was there. We both agreed we did not care much about the ceremony. We wanted to save for a trip, maybe Europe, maybe a train across the Rockies. But when we mapped the guest list, it was clear. Most of his family was scattered across the country. Most of mine was still anchored in Ohio. A hometown wedding made logistical sense. "If we do it there," Daniel said, We can take long weekends to plan. We'll keep it simple. I was nervous about introducing him to my parents. Distance had softened some memories, blurred the edges like an old photograph. Part of me wanted to believe maybe they had changed. Part of me knew better. I told Daniel we would not leave him alone with them. He looked at me, eyebrows raised. "You think I haven't been preparing?" he said. He showed me a tiny digital recorder he had bought, the kind that fits in a shirt pocket. "For evidence," he said with a grin, "or for posterity." He went to meet them without me. I stayed in our apartment pacing. When he came back hours later, his eyes were bright, the way some people's are after a roller coaster. "Babe," he said, "you won't believe it." He told me everything. How my parents had sat him down, how Madison had perched on the arm of a chair in a white sundress like she was already in rehearsal, how they had offered to pay for our wedding on one condition. Madison would walk down the aisle first, in a wedding dress, at my wedding. Their excuse was tradition, Daniel said, but it was straight out of a soap opera. He pulled the recorder from his pocket like a magician. "We have it all." I felt the room tilt. I had known they would find some way to make the wedding about Madison, but I had not imagined this. My first reaction was not anger. It was a hollow sadness, the kind that makes you want to lie down on the floor and stare at the ceiling until it stops spinning. Daniel knelt in front of me, hands on my knees. "Hey," he said, "this is an opportunity. We can choose how to respond." We spent nights at the kitchen table sketching plans. Some were wild. Fake venues, decoy invitations, elaborate pranks. Daniel's brother, who is the steady one in his family, warned us about lawsuits and logistics. "If you're going to do revenge," he said over speakerphone, "do it clean. Do it in a way no one can pin on you." Eventually, we settled on the simplest plan. Act like we agreed, let them think they had control, then hire security and keep Madison out. It would be revenge, yes, but also protection. It would give me one day of my own. Daniel played his part perfectly. He went back to my parents and said he understood their position. He told them I did not like conflict and might not make a scene if surprised. He hinted that because of my bad judgment with boyfriends, their words thrown back at them, he was trying to guide me. He suggested they pay for extras to sweeten the deal. They ate it up. Madison, he said, literally skipped with joy. He made sure nothing about the plan was ever in writing. They believed every word. Meanwhile, we used their control to upgrade everything. We would go taste the cheapest menu option. Then Daniel would sigh in front of Madison and say, "It's a pity we can't afford the better one." Cue Madison demanding our parents pay for the expensive option so her grand entrance would be grand. We did the same with flowers, photographer, even table linens. We called it emotional back pay. Daniel was gleeful. "I never thought I'd be excited about flower arrangements," he said one night. "But watching them pay for the bouquet you actually want? Chef's kiss." I, who had once considered a courthouse wedding to save money for our honeymoon, found myself at fittings for a gown that felt like silk water. My parents tried to push me into a dress that did not suit me, but because my mother texted about it, I had written proof and could refuse. Daniel pretended to agree with Madison's suggestion to ruin my dress to force me into theirs. "They're practically writing the script for us," he said, shaking his head. During all of this, Madison tried her usual tactics. She messaged Daniel. She accidentally brushed his arm. He acted conflicted, to sell the story, but never crossed a line. I, who used to shrink from confrontation, found myself laughing at the thought of being painted as controlling and jealous. "Play it up," I told him. "Make me sound like a dragon." He did. It worked. They never risked anything in writing. They thought they were tricking me. All the while we were building a wedding on their dime and our terms. By the time spring came, everything was set. We had a venue. We had security. We had a plan down to the minute. We even had a friend in on it, a bridesmaid in spirit whose job would be to text me updates and create a distraction if needed. Daniel rehearsed his confused and outraged face in the mirror. I practiced breathing evenly. On the night before the wedding, we stayed at a little inn outside town. Daniel lay beside me, tracing patterns on my palm. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "is your day." no matter what happens. I stared at the ceiling fan, turning slowly, and thought of all the doors I had been told were not for me. This one, at least, would open. And Madison? She was at my parents' house, slipping into a white dress, rehearsing a walk that would never happen. The fuse was lit. The morning of my wedding dawned with a kind of stillness you only get in late summer before the sun really starts to burn. The inn smelled like coffee and fresh sheets. Outside, a breeze moved through the maples like a hand through hair. I woke before the alarm and lay there listening to Daniel breathe. For a moment, I let myself imagine an ordinary day. No schemes, no history, just two people about to make a promise. Then I rolled onto my back and whispered, "We ready?" He opened one eye, grinned, and said, "Born ready." We had rehearsed everything. The security detail, a tall, even-tempered man named Carl, who looked like he could moonlight in a superhero film, had his instructions. Our inside friend would be stationed near the entrance, phone in hand, ready to text me updates. The bridesmaids knew to follow my father's lead without checking with me to keep up appearances. My father thought he would be orchestrating a grand reveal. In reality, he was cueing a very different play. At the venue, the air conditioning hummed against the hum of nerves. The hall was a swirl of flowers and soft music and people taking their seats. I dressed slowly, savoring the feel of the fabric, the way it whispered against my skin. When I looked in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself, not because of the dress, but because of the calm on my face. For years I had been the girl who flinched. Today I looked like someone standing on her own ground. A text buzzed. "She's on her way. 5 minutes." I exhaled. Another text. "Your dad at the entrance. Music starting soon." Everything was falling into place. I waited in the anteroom, hands clasped. Through the crack of the door, I could see guests shifting in their chairs, programs fluttering like nervous birds. My father signaled the coordinator. The bridal song swelled, the doors opened, and it was me who walked through. My father's head snapped up, his mouth opened. For a heartbeat he looked behind me, expecting to see Madison in her borrowed white. Instead, there was only Carl at the door, broad as a wall, checking the list. My father's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID. It was her. He mumbled something. Something came up and stepped aside, leaving me alone at the threshold. Gasps moved through the room like wind in grass. Our friend, playing her part, spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "What did he mean? It wasn't supposed to be you." She darted off toward the entrance, creating a ripple of curiosity. Guests turned their heads. Whispers spread. I took a breath and began walking down the aisle. My husband's father, already in position as backup, stepped forward and offered his arm. His eyes were warm. "Let's get you married," he murmured. I smiled and held on. At the far end, Daniel waited, his face a picture of worry for the crowd, but his eyes sparkling just for me. "You're doing amazing," he whispered when I reached him. "Oscar-worthy." We said our vows over a low murmur of speculation. People slipped out and returned, phones buzzing with updates from the lobby. My parents did not come back. The ceremony went on anyway. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the applause rose like a tide, mixed with relief and curiosity. Later at the reception, the food and drink we had chosen, all of it upgraded on Madison's demands, flowed freely. Guests danced, laughed, made a point of congratulating me with extra warmth, as if to make up for whatever drama they had just witnessed. I caught Daniel breaking character and grinning over the cake. "Worth every second," he said. The full story came to me in pieces, like a mosaic. Carl at the door telling Madison she must be at the wrong venue because there was already a bride. My father trying to threaten him with the police. Carl calmly offering to call them himself. Our friend arriving just then, yelling and stalling, creating a scene that pulled more people into the hallway. My mother appearing, looking stricken. Madison on the floor in a white dress, screaming and kicking her legs like a child. My father purple with rage, my mother crying, guests filming on their phones. Daniel summoned to the lobby and putting on his best confused look, denying everything, demanding proof. "Why would I ever agree to something so messed up?" he said, loud enough for everyone. "You're trying to ruin her wedding." Without texts or emails, my parents had nothing but their word, and for once their word wasn't enough. By the time they were told to leave, the crowd had turned on them. Even relatives who had been politely neutral were horrified. "They actually wanted Madison to walk down the aisle?" someone muttered. "At Emma's wedding?" No one could make it make sense. They left under a cloud of murmurs and camera flashes. Carl later told us he had never been tipped so well or enjoyed a job so much. Inside, the reception glowed. People danced harder, laughed louder, as if to fill the space my family had vacated. For once, the day was about me and the man I had chosen. For once, I did not have to apologize for existing. That night, in the hotel room, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the bed with a slice of cake in my lap. Daniel came out of the shower, hair damp, and said, "You looked incredible out there." I laughed, a little wild with relief. "We did it," I said. "They tried, and we still had our day." He sat beside me and clinked his fork against mine like a toast. "To doors that stay open," he said. Since then, my parents have tried to call. Madison sent a message so unhinged, Daniel joked about framing it. She blamed me for her humiliation, called him a two-faced snake, predicted he would cheat on me. He screenshotted everything and sent it to the family group chat along with their missed calls, writing a calm plea for help to stop the harassment. My aunts and uncles rallied, promising to handle it, telling us to enjoy our honeymoon. For once, the tide turned without me having to push. Sometimes when I think back on that day, I do not picture Madison on the floor or my father's face. I picture the moment I stepped through the doors and the music swelled and the whispers rose, and still I walked. I picture Daniel waiting, steady, eyes bright. I picture my own hands not shaking. People like to ask me if it felt like revenge. It did, a little. But more than that, it felt like reclaiming something I had been told was not mine. A day, a choice, a life. We spent years being careful, planning, paying attention. And then, finally, we stepped into our own story. There are still days when I wish my family had been different, when I wish the porch of that green shuttered house had been a softer place. But there are also days when I stand in our kitchen, Daniel making coffee, light streaming across the counter, and I think, we built this. We built it out of small acts repeated until they became a life. And on the shelf above the stove, next to the salt, there is a little frame. Inside it is a printout of Madison's message, the one where she calls Daniel a snake and says he fooled them for months. Beneath it, Daniel has written in block letters, "Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss." We laugh every time we see it. It is not the kind of wedding photo most people hang, but it is ours.